Hello everybody and welcome. Today's video, I'm doing something a little bit different. I want to branch out a little bit. I enjoy doing the Hearts of Iron content I have been doing and I will continue to do so, but I kind of wanted to start doing some other kind of content too. And today's content that I want to start up and probably do a lot of is more of a history focused discussion. I'm a big history geek. I like learning a lot about history and all that stuff. It's one of the reasons I got into Hearts of Iron and the war games and all that. And so I like to think about and talk about history a lot. And in today's video, I want to talk about a topic I've been hearing a lot of people talk about and question, and it is why does Germany, the German Empire from World War One, get a lot of the, if not the majority of the blame for the war when realistically it's kind of more of an Austria-Hungary like issue because they're the ones who declared war on Serbia, and then also kind of like Russia for like expanding it to become more of a great powers war, which led to it becoming a world war instead of just a localized Balkan-ish conflict that had been going on for years at that point. But before we get into that, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And here we go. So the main reason I really think that Germany gets a lot of the blame for it is because when people think about it, like the big reason is the blank check that Germany kind of just let Austria do what it get the war with Serbia, even though they knew Russia would not be happy with that and let that happen. Even like there's instances for like throughout the 1900s leading up to then where like Germany kind of backed down from fully letting Austria have war in the Balkans and try to assert itself and been more diplomatic and stuff. And then because of like they felt more and more threatened by Russia industrializing, that they kind of wanted to get that over with. They wanted to try to win a war before Russia became too hard to do the Schlieffen Plan and all that. But like that doesn't really portray why everyone really blames Germany when like yes, that's a big cause of why it got more out of hand than it realistically should have. It's not necessarily like the biggest war blame. And I think the reason's actually quite simple, if you think about it. The German Empire, realistically, out of the belligerents that got into the initial conflict that grew into World War One, was Austria, Hungary, Serbia, Russia, and Germany. So three great powers and a minor European nation that got attacked. Now, with how culpable Serbia is with like the Black Hand and the assassination of Archduke, I'm not sure. Like, could have it been the Serbian government pushing for that and actually having that? Maybe, but it also very well could have just been Serb nationalism on its own, not the Serbian government. I'm not really informed enough to. I don't think there's ever really been a consensus on that, and I don't think there probably ever will be because like that's kind of a hard thing to prove, and with how the war started, like that's probably not going to be a thing that we're ever going to be really ever know. But the thing is that out of those four, three were the great powers, so like they're kind of the ones who are dictating the war terms. And by the time the dust settled in November of 1918, and then going into June of 1919, when like the Treaty of Versailles was signed and like the official like war ended technically, like the there was an armistice in 1918 in November, but like that the war technically didn't end until the treaties in June, but that's not really that important. The thing is, the German Empire is the only one that was really left standing out of the three great powers that were like the initial fighters. The Russian Empire completely collapsed and had one revolution that the July or October Revolution. I'm not great with that one, but like the first one that put in the provisional government that wanted to keep fighting the Germans, but then they got overthrown by the communists and Lenin in the Russian Revolution, which led to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where Russia lost control of a large amount of territory, and then the Soviet Civil War happens, where like the Soviets and the Whites are fighting. It's a whole big thing. So like the Russian Empire just imploded and was on the side that wasn't the ones who started the initial war, but had just kind of been more of an escalating power. So it's pretty easy to tell why they don't get as much blame as they probably should. And then you got Austria-Hungary, who also just completely exploded. Like, by the time the war was even ending, Austria-Hungary was basically a vassal state of Germany. Like, the German military was kind of propping it up and telling them what to do. And they were largely in control of the decisions the Austria-Hungary had made. Like, even if they had if the Central Powers had won the war, how much independence Austria-Hungary would continue to have after that, they probably would have gained back some autonomy, but they were in a rough shape. It probably would have been a while before they could have completely asserted more. Like, they probably would have been almost definitely reduced from a great power to more of a middling or secondary power, even if Germany had won. So it's like, yeah, and by the time the war ended and Versailles happened, and the other, like Trianon and the other treaties, Austria-Hungary had basically exploded, and the aftermath led to multiple wars. Like, there was the Romanian-Hungary War, and, like, I know, like, Yugoslavia had some issues. Like, there was just a lot of issues. Like, Austria-Hungary had completely imploded, and no one wanted to take up the war guilt. Like, that was actually one of the things with, like, Austria and Hungary, like, the not modern nations of it, because Austria has had multiple governments overturned and was annexed for World War II, and Hungary had its government dismantled after World War II. So it's not modern Hungary and modern Austria, but close enough. Neither of them wanted, neither of them were claiming to be successor states to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so they wouldn't get racked with, like, war debts and stuff like that. Like, they were trying to argue pretty hard about they're not Austria-Hungary. And I think that kind of leads to one of the reasons why they're not really blamed as much. They ceased to exist. It's kind of like when someone dies and, like, at the funeral, people are a lot nicer about them than they would be if they were still alive, kind of thing, where, like, if Austria-Hungary had limped its way out of the war, I think for sure people would have been way harsher on it than we end up seeing now, like, over 100 years later. I feel like if it had made it through and had made it another decade or two before having it fall apart, because it was not going to make it. Like, it would not have made it through the 20th century. But if it had made it a little bit longer, I feel like we probably would have given it a lot more of the guilt it probably deserves, just because of that fact. There's also the fact that, like, France really didn't like Germany, and the UK not happy with them after they invaded Belgium, and then, like, the US also not happy with them because of the sinking of, like, the Lusitania and then, like, the war. Like, another aspect is that, like, most people who, like, especially, like, the great powers on the other side, so this, the US, France, Britain, as well as most of the other Entente, like, any of the Entente nations and all that, it was mainly the Germans they were fighting. Like, yes, they were fighting the Austro-Hungarians, but that was a lot more like the Italians and the Serbians who were fighting them than, like, the other nations. Like, that, it was mostly Germany. Like, Russia was mostly, like, it had dealings with Austria-Hungary on their border and stuff, but they actually did pretty good against them, but they didn't do so good against the Germans. And then, like, everyone else was pretty much fighting the Germans. I guess, like, Romania also fought the Austro-Hungarians. That happened quite a few years later. So I think that also might be a thing that's dragging it on, is that also, like I mentioned earlier about the fact that Austria-Hungary kind of was more a vassal state to Germany by the end of the war. Like, Germany really kept the war going at the end of the day, like, because by the time the Americans joined, like, you have Russia defeating the, not Russia, you have Germany beating back the Russians until the Russian Revolution happens and the Russian Civil War, and then they turn around and try to do the, what is it? Was it the Kaiser Offensive? I think's what it was. Like, where they turned around and tried to push and defeat France before the Americans showed up. It's like they did a really hard push and all that. And, like, the Russians fell apart in 1917. And the armistice didn't happen until November of 1918. So, pretty much a year later, Like, that was pretty much all that last year was all the Germans doing. If the Germans had it wouldn't have worked, and like we had seen, like there was backroom negotiations going on and all that. It probably wouldn't have worked, but like Germany really kind of kept the war going at that point. Like they were in it. If they would have in 1917 maybe tried to get peace, where like they would have to obviously have given up territory to France. France wanted Alsace-Lorraine back. Full stop. Germany was not getting off without giving that back. And then probably would have lost their colonies, like what actually ended up happening. That probably would have had to have been there probably would have been a lot of concessions, and like they wouldn't have been allowed to keep control over like the other like Brest-Litovsk countries that had broken out of the Russian Empire. Like, but Germany theoretically, again, I don't think it was likely, but like if they had done that, they might have been able to get the war over with and not been completely dismantled. Not dismantled, but like so soured with war debt and lost so much territory and stuff. Because like, that would have been a whole year less fighting, and they would have been in a more advantageous situation. Because when the armistice happened, it was because the Entente was marching into Germany. Like they had just reached Germany proper, and Germany saw the writing on the wall at that point. But a year before, with more resources that they hadn't have expended yet, and potentially more goodwill, especially from like the Americans who would not have been fighting all that much by that time period, could have been possible. And I think that really soured the taste for a lot of people, like at the time, like the Americans, the British, the French, because that's a whole nother year of like the war lasted like 4.5 years. Imagine how many, and like there were some big offenses in that last year. Like with that many less people dying on the Entente side, probably would have meant that Germany wouldn't have been as hated. Because I think that's also what it comes down to. People were just really mad at Germany over it, rightfully so. Like they were pretty much the, I guess what you would say, like the dominant power of the Central Powers. Like they were the ones who everyone was fighting and who was the strong one. Like, yes, they didn't necessarily start the fight, but like if you imagine as a group of friends, yeah, the big guy who didn't and had a smaller friend who started the fight, but the big guy is the one who punched you and broke your nose. Who are you more mad at? The guy who started the fight, who's someone you like, they got knocked out in the fight. They didn't even make it out of the fight. They're on the ground knocked out. Or the guy who fought you to a standstill for a long time, broke your nose and your arm, and bloodied you, and it was just a hard fought fight that you finally won. Who do you dislike more? In that case, I would hate the guy who broke my arm and broke my nose, not the guy who started the fight that led to that as much. And I think that's kind of the sentiment that really happened, was that Germany had been the one who had inflicted the most casualties and the most damage to the other nations, so that's why no one liked them. So I think that probably covers why Germany gets most of the blame instead of Austria-Hungary and anyone else. Simply the fact they're pretty much the war leader of the losing side, and if you're the war leader of the losing side, it doesn't really matter if you're the one who started it or not. You're seen as the end-all, be-all, and the buck stops with you. And, well, as we can see, people clearly say the buck stops with them, even if it technically is not really fully that much their fault, just partially. But anyway, I think that's going to wrap it up, and I'll see you guys in the next one.